Hey friends, I'm Christy, and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat, a podcast for women who are done playing small. If you've been shrinking to keep the peace or waiting for permission to want more, climb aboard because we are going to make some waves together. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you're never left stranded on the shore. And if you want a more connected experience, visit thrivewithchristy.com to learn more about the Thrive Collective, a community that combines boat rocking energy with the grounding effects of yoga and breathwork with live calls and classes. Now on to the show. I am back and on schedule for a Sunday shorty. Now, last week I did say I would come back and revisit my solo adventure. And on my birthday, June 13th, I left with my husband to head to Reno, Nevada. And he left on his cattle drive, his 5-day cattle drive, and I went on a solo adventure through Northern California and then through the Lake Tahoe area, which I crossed both the California and the Nevada side, and then made my way back to Reno to meet back up with my husband. I have my t-shirt on if you are watching. Now, one of the big debates coming out of my trip is it Nevada or Nevada? Because people in that neck of the woods say Nevada. I always would have said Nevada. That's how I'll probably end up pronouncing it for most of this episode. But weigh in. Tell me in the comments. Is it Nevada or Nevada? It's kind of like tomato, tomato. So I loved my trip. I loved everything about it. And the reason I wanted to talk about it when it comes to rocking the damn boat is whether or not you are a solo traveler. Do you love to solo adventure as much as I do? I think that traveling with friends is great. Traveling with spouses, families, all great. But there is, to me, nothing like a solo adventure. I don't know that I was as big of a solo traveler prior to my move to Arizona. I'm sure I had to travel for work, but a lot of times it was with work people. I moved to Arizona in 2012, and that was my first time leaving Texas to live anywhere else. I was 37 years old, so I had lived a comfortable life in the Lone Star State and decided to leave and expand my world, broaden my horizons. Did exactly that. Phoenix, and being in the desert and learning to love hiking was a huge benefit for me. You get so much vitamin D from the steady stream of sunlight. And when I moved back to Texas, it was like, wow, okay, cloudy days and rain, and it definitely shifted. I loved being in Phoenix, learned to love hiking. And I forgot just how much I loved hiking until I went on this trip. I was supposed to be hosting a retreat in the Tahoe area, and when that didn't work out, I didn't get enough signups, and I knew my husband would want me to travel with him. He's a little bit of a nervous flyer, nervous traveler, and I do it so often that it's piece cake for me. I reached out to my friend Dawn, who I know from a online sobriety group. She makes jewelry that I have many, many pieces of. And she suggested that I stay in the Nevada City Grass Valley area, which was about an hour from Sacramento, where she lives. She said, I'll come up, we'll have lunch. It's a cute little town, we can shop. So we ended up booking a yurt in Nevada City. Oh, look, I said it right. I went into town, would go and explore on my own. The first day when I was coming into town, I had to check out of the Reno hotel on Sunday. My husband was going off on his cattle drive, and I was headed to Nevada City for Sunday, and I decided to look up a hike that I could maybe do on the way or once I got there, because I couldn't check in to my Airbnb until 4 p.m., but I had to check out of the hotel at 11 a.m., and I realized over the course of this trip how inconvenient that can be, because then when I checked out of the yurt and into the place in Lake Tahoe, I had the same gap in times. If you are a hiker, you may have all of the best apps and know how to be resourceful. I hadn't hiked in quite some time, and All Trails is a paid subscription now. So there's only so much information you can get specifically on All Trails. But I found Google reviews to be incredibly helpful. So if you Google, use Apple Maps and just search, and it would bring up, I'd say hiking trails in Nevada City. And it would bring up all of these trails in the area, and then you could click on it and it would take you to the Google listing for it. So it would be reviews. I could understand from people like how busy would the trail be? Was it moderate, easy, family friendly, all of those things. And it was really helpful. I also found a couple of travel blogs, and that was more in the Tahoe piece of things. But found this trail in Nevada City, drove through the neighborhood, parked along the road, and it ended up being this beautiful trail. It was not very long, just maybe a mile and a half round trip. There was a beautiful suspension bridge that I walked across, and I felt a little bit like Lara Croft Tomb Raider because it was swinging and it was modern, so it wasn't wooden. It was definitely material that I felt confident in. But the motion of it was a little disconcerting. But when I got to the other side, I decided to take this little detour down a pretty steep scramble, and I ended up down by this gorgeous waterfall. And I sat there for a while, and there was another couple of people and someone with a dog, and they were kind of off to the side. And I kept debating, like, do I want to take my shoes off and wade into the water? Because it was beautiful, cold, clear water coming down the mountain. I decided not to because I didn't want to put wet feet back into my socks on my hike, just getting started, and I worried it might rub a blister. So I decided to go back, take the big loop that I had read about, and it was absolutely charming. And the tall trees always amaze me, especially because where I'm at in rural Texas, we have cedars and some decent sized hackberry and mesquite, but not a lot of big tall trees. So there's gorgeous big pine trees and redwoods. And I am forgetting the name of the tree that always makes me think of a giant plumeria. I think it's manzanita. There were gorgeous trees, and the whole entire trail was shaded. And not only, well, it was a Sunday afternoon, which had been reported to be kind of a busy time, but it was 90 degrees. And I've learned, or at least I learned over the course of that week, that people who live in the mountains don't like to hike in 90-degree weather. Well, this girl's from Texas, and if a trail is shaded and it feels like 80, 85 underneath the tree canopy, I'll take it. I was in heaven. So I walked this first little trail and checked into my yurt, checked out Nevada City, got some dinner. The next day, I looked up what was close to me, and I found a beautiful trail called Hirschman Trail. Ended up being 5 minutes, if that, from my Airbnb. I just drove down the exact road that I was on. I think it's Cemetery Road, and walked around. You could walk the perimeter of Hirschman Pond, but I decided to go on and take the full Hirschman Trail. And it wound around. I got to go across some other little small wooden bridges. There was this really cool art installation where someone had cut stumps and then lined them up so that you could walk across them. And they kind of wound around and made like a little snake curly Q. And when I got to the very end, there was a little sign that you could do the QR code to learn more about this art installation, that apparently they're doing some of these across all of the parks in that area. I think it was by county, maybe Nevada County. So I got to see this cool art installation, got to go up and down through the forest. And once again, it was so healing and felt great in my body. If you've never heard of the concept of forest bathing, it originates in Japan. It's not that old, but it's just this idea that it's very cleansing to be among these tall trees. And I first learned about it when I was walking on a trail in Canada, but then I really felt it when I went and walked in Muir Woods back in 2019. I just love being under the trees and getting to be present. Now, do my thoughts wander while I'm hiking? Absolutely. And I don't listen to podcasts. I don't listen to music. Twofold. One, I want to be present, and two, I want to be safe. So I want to know, especially as a solo hiker, whether or not somebody is walking up behind me or ahead of me. So I always recommend being very present as a solo hiker. So I walked the Hirschman Trail on day 2, and then on day 3, I was checking out of the yurt, and I went to a yoga class down in Nevada City. Inner Path Yoga. It was absolutely gorgeous. The teacher, Tina, teaches very much like me, nice, slow holding and poses. I loved the class. I loved the community. One of the people after class suggested that I go down to the Yuba River. She said, we love the river. Everyone around here, it's hot. Everybody's going to be down at the river. I drive over to the river and it's packed. I can't find a place to park. And I remembered seeing a trailhead sign a little ways back, and there was one car there. So I decided to drive back and park at the Independence trailhead. And I look up on my map, and that's a nice thing again. Apple Maps has most of the trails marked on the map, so you can see where it's going to go. I start up the Independence Trail, and I see this sign that says, work ahead, proceed with caution. I'm like, okay, well, I'll check it out when I get there, and if I'm worried, I'll turn around, I'll come back, no problem. I walk maybe a mile, maybe not quite that, half a mile, and I come across some caution tape, and I realize it's for the bridge up ahead. And this bridge was maybe it was rustic, we'll put it that way. So the bridge had been around a while. It was plank, it was wooden, had like a framework underneath it. I don't know what that's called. Like the suspension bridge was literally anchored one end to the other with nothing underneath. This was anchored underneath like a scaffolding, but some of the wooden planks were actually busted through, so starting to rot out. And I start down this bridge that seems impossibly long. I kept imagining the cartoon, right, where all of a sudden, you fall through and the whole bridge collapses. It did not feel that scary. I did stay a little close to the handrail just in case, but it was definitely not that bad. Just a few places where you could see they needed to replace boards, which I'm sure is why they said proceed with caution. I crossed over a little creek and I stopped, and I did put my feet in that little creek on the way back. But here's the deal. I come down all the way down Independence Trail. I ended up crossing over a bridge where I could see down to the Yuba River, could see everybody, like people jumping off stones. It was neat. And would I have liked to have cooled off in the river? Probably, but I didn't make it down there. I could see it from way, way up high. I go all the way to the end. I'm looking on the map and I'm seeing, well, maybe I can get to the water. It looks like if I go this certain way, I can access the water. I start down. And it's kind of slippery in my tennis shoes, which I admittedly thought had much better traction. And I end up slipping and falling right on my behind. I must have hit a rock because I had a bruise the size of a toddler's foot afterwards. But I make it all the way down. I just keep going because I am ambitious when it comes to exploration. And I don't know why. I'm not an adrenaline junkie, so had this been like a rock climbing adventure or having to rappel down a mountain, no, but the trail didn't look so strenuous that I couldn't get down. So I just held on to some trees. I made my way down. I get down there and there's all these huge boulders. So any way that I'm going to get to the river is going to have to be crossing these huge boulders. I can see the water. I can see the rushing water, but I just can't get to it. Now, I probably could have continued to scramble across the rocks and make my way to the water, but I noticed some people across the river and realized that I was across from the clothing optional beach. I decided not to bother those people because now they probably wouldn't have cared, but I didn't want to come across like a voyeur from across the river. I don't know how many people end up coming down the side that I came down and then going across to the nude beach, but I didn't want to bother anyone. So I stood on top of a rock. There were some trees blocking me from the small handful of people who were taking the option not to wear clothing. And I just watched the rushing water in the river and took in the sights, rested for a few minutes, made my way back across the rocks, back up that really steep scramble, and back to my car. So that was quite an adventure. I did stop in that little creek, let my feet soak, and then finished my hike. The following day, I was in Tahoe. The person who rented us the car had suggested going to Sand Harbor, even though I was staying in Kings Beach. She said it might be a little less touristy, and if you can get there early, you can get a parking spot, and that's where you should go. Well, I look up Sand Harbor, and I see a little further south, there's a beach called Chimney Beach. Now, this was where the travel bloggers came in handy because I read a little bit about it. saw some pictures, thought it looked really cool. And it was a little off the beaten path because you had to hike about half mile to a mile to actually get to the beach. So that's a little bit of a deterrent. You have to be really committed to get to Chimney Beach. Not only was Sand Harbor completely full, there was no parking, but I had also decided to start at Chimney Beach because it was further away. I thought, well, I'll spend a little time there, come back by Sand Harbor, and then head back to my Airbnb, which was absolutely adorable, by the way. It was a little tiny house. It was well outfitted. You will see a couple of different podcast episodes that will be the background. But I decided to go to Chimney Beach. It was $12 to park. There was this beautiful paved lot. The attendant said that it was new, so most people didn't know about it, which is why it was easy to get parking. I had to walk across and walk the mile to the beach. I finally get to this little bluff and realize, okay, I'm at Chimney Beach. I see the chimney. I make my way down the trail, and it's kind of a little cove, like a tiny little cove. There were maybe 20 people at the beach, and there was another little cove a little ways away that had probably a few more people, some loud music going, more like you would see at a typical beach. But being on this almost secret cove was magical. The water was so cold and clear. I'd never been to Tahoe. So I was so glad and grateful that I have this adventurous spirit that I would be willing to traipse through the woods by myself on a relatively unmarked trail to make it to Chimney Beach. I had worn a sports bra and some quick dry shorts and a t-shirt that I thought, well, I can get in the water with this outfit. So I ended up getting in the water. I was so glad I did. It was a great way to cool off. Now, I did not bring sunscreen because I wasn't sure I was going to get in the water, and that was my mistake because I laid out on a rock to dry out. And I ended up getting horribly blistered burns on my stomach. So be sun smart, especially if your stomach has not seen the light of day in years. So that was my hard lesson learned. Overall, though, it was a great experience. I decided to hike a little ways down Chimney Trail. Rumor had it there was another secret cove at the end of Chimney Trail that was also a clothing optional beach, but I opted not to make my way that far down. I had seen enough naked people a couple of days earlier. I was good. I had such a good time on this trip. I left the next day and went back to Reno to meet up with my husband. We went to the rodeo Friday night, and then we headed back on Saturday. And then I spent one night in my bed and then headed to Charlotte. I am a firm believer in embracing, first of all, nature, second of all, adventure. To be someone who would sit at the hotel bar when I would go travel for work or travel anywhere, and now utilizing that time to get out and explore whatever city I'm in has been a gift of sobriety. And doing those things continuing to push me out of my comfort zone. And now, I enjoy hiking. I just bought myself some new hiking boots because those shoes and that bruise. And so I realized I needed some new shoes, especially if I'm going to make this a regular thing. I forgot how much I enjoyed it. And I think the few takeaways that I would love for you to have from this episode: 1, get out in nature because it is so healing. 2, revisit things that you used to love. Maybe you're not as capable. I don't know that I could hike as strenuously or some of the hiking trails that I used to do. I used to climb Piestewa Peak in Phoenix. I don't know that I would want to anymore. It's so steep, but these easy to moderate hikes are a great way to still get that experience and not pick the most difficult ones. And finally, just being resourceful. You can rock the damn boat by doing something out of your comfort zone. Start with an easy hike. Start with going to a park you've never been to before. Start with something that feels simple. Tell somebody where you're going, because that was one other difficult lesson learned aside from the sunburn, was that when I fell on my behind and it bruised so bad, I thought this could have gone a lot worse. I could have fallen forward instead of backwards and really hurt myself. And I didn't have a great signal and nobody knew where I was. I did not tell anyone that I was on the Independence Trail in Yuba, California. So I told my mom the next day when I was going to Chimney Beach because I knew Ryan was out on the trail of his own. And I told my mom, I'm going to Chimney Beach. I'm letting you know so that if anything happens, you don't hear from me, you know where to send the rescue squad. Overall, though, I hiked, I believe, over 15 miles in the course of 4 days. I can't wait to do a bigger hiking trip. My book editor is going on a trip, I think in France, a big hiking trip through the Alps. I don't know where this is going to lead, but I have rekindled a passion for hiking. And if you have any suggestions, I would love to know what they are. Comment, follow, subscribe. Everyone has been asking if I am going to continue doing the podcast. The answer right now is yes, but you need to follow, subscribe, comment. Numbers are down slightly, so I need you to help me boost the ratings, get into more people's ears. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You've been listening to Rock the Damn Boat, a podcast produced and recorded by Christy Hughes. You can follow, subscribe on both Apple and Spotify, and your 5-star review goes a long way. Thank you so much for your support of the show.